Welcome to All About Impact, the official podcast of Imagine If Insights and Strategy. I'm your host, Susan Patoyan. All About Impact is the only podcast in the world that is exclusively dedicated to the art and science of creating real and positive impact with data, research, and insights. We push ambitious marketers, practitioners, and users of data, research, and insights to create meaningful, tangible, real-world impact with their work. Join us as we bring you diverse perspectives from hand-picked impact champions, incredible cross-disciplinary leaders who are masters at activating insights to transform business and achieve unparalleled success for their teams, organizations, careers, and of course, customers. Now is the time to venture into the world of influence and impact far beyond data and insights. Tune in today and boldly unleash the impact champion in you. In this episode of All About Impact, my guest is Liz Huszarik, co-founder at Mavericks, an insights and strategy agency, and most recently CRO at Warner Brothers Discovery, where she and her team get this supported $7 billion worth of entertainment assets with research. Liz and I spoke about one question, both very easy and very hard to answer this question. And the question is, what does it take to define impact? Welcome to another episode of All About Impact, Imagine If's dedicated podcast to creating great impact, positive impact with research. Today, I have an amazing guest with me, Liz Huszarik. Liz, I've known Liz for many years, and I have always been impressed by her amazing wisdom as a very senior research leader, and I've seen her firsthand working in very complex boardrooms, influencing as well as making big decisions. So Liz, I'll do a quick intro, but I would love to give our audience a chance to hear directly from you. So most recently, Liz was a chief research insights and data officer at Warner Brothers Discovery. She has 25 years of experience in overseeing and refining the company's global insights, data science, and analytics organization. She is just a powerhouse of all things data, insights, and strategy. And it's an honor, it's a privilege to have you here, Liz. I would love to start, welcome, first of all. I would love to start with a quick question. Please tell our audience from your voice, from your view, a little bit about your career. Maybe start, how you started, how you got into insights, and what parts of your career you love the most.
Well, thank you, Susan, first of all, for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to see you again. It's been too long, as we mentioned. You've always been such an impressive colleague and collaborator, so I'm glad I have this opportunity to speak with you today. So you did sum it up. I was most recently the chief research officer at Warner Brothers Discovery in a role that I worked across my career for, and it really was sort of a pinnacle for me at that point. In not only was I in that position, had a seat at the table, right, which I think is so critical, Susan, and not being just the voice of the consumer, which is critical in our role as insights executives, but also a role and a voice as a strategist. So really taking that insight and applying it and having that voice at the table as that informed strategist. So really a very fulfilling role. In addition, what I loved with that opportunity was my team, myself, we were embedded within the businesses. So everything that we did was through a business lens. Yes, it was through the market, the consumer, the intersection of technology and generation and cultural shifts. But how would that insight, data, social information inform business decisions? So our motto was data without insights is meaningless. Insights without action are pointless. And we really held ourselves to that motto and ensured that everything we did informed business decisions. They may say, yes, this is a good strategy, move forward, or hey, these are the challenges, these are the hurdles, these are the roadblocks. So it was really becoming partners with business leaders that was so fulfilling for myself as well as the team. And one last mention is, and I think for all researchers, Susan, is that having a growth mindset. Continually learning, growing, evolving your skill sets, because our consumers, our viewers, our fans, our customers are evolving at such a rate now that if we're not learning and growing and evolving, then we're falling behind very, very quickly. So I think it's such an exciting time for all of us in this industry.
I love that. There's so much that you just packed in there, Liz. And I think we'll come back to a few of those things in a minute. But thank you for stressing the fact that it's important to also be a strategy person, right? A strategy professional, coming very close to that table or sitting at the table, helping drive strategy, obviously cross-functionally with the rest of C-suite or whatever the level the decision-making is at, as opposed to just being a research kind of person, an analytics, a data person. I think that's a huge theme that we shouldn't neglect, even when there's so many tools and so much data that is available for companies out there. It's what to do with that data strategically that matters the most, as you said. Awesome. So Liz, I think just to kind of, get kind of the ground, kind of start a good conversation about impact, I would love to understand, based on your experience, based on years of doing this and really driving that strategy on some of the most complex business issues out there, right? I want to know the way you define impact, the way you think about what an impactful piece of research, any data initiative might be, above and beyond the typical things that we think about, which is it accurate? Is it on time? Is it on budget? Kind of when we're doing financial planning, what's the ROI, right? Broadly speaking, or more strategically speaking, how did you look at creating impact? How did you even define impact in the first place?
A very complex question, right? And takes a bit of time. But I think, first off, to just put a framework around it, over my years at the studio, I was with Warner Brothers for 25 years, and my career continued to evolve, and I worked across more and more of the divisions. But really, and you probably saw this in your career too, Susan, in media, this was very common, where when you first started, you were reporting on what happened, what the consumer did. We were reporting. And then we evolved into insights partners, where we were the voice of the consumer at the table. And that was a big step forward. But then we really stepped forward where we became strategic consultants within the organization. And that is where I believe we're most effective and where the ROI sits, right? It is, what are you learning from that body of work, whatever it might be, if it's a heavy data, big data analysis, if it's a combination with experiments or survey work, whatever it is, what are those learnings? And then back to insights without action or the potential for action are pointless, right? And then you become that cost center. You said over budget. So when you really start to provide that value, is it being measured by, yes, action was taken because this organization came to us and said either there is an opportunity, the lane is wide open, or there's not. It is clogged. The competitors have the share and you're going to have to pivot, right? And where is that pivot? And through your work in the insights team's work and the data analytics team, you can piece that together and assist your business partners in creating that framework to move forward. I do think one of the advantages that late in my career at the studio, at that point in my career, was the combination of the insights, data science, and social intelligence teams. Prior to that, they had been operating independently, and we really weren't, Susan, leveraging the power of the insights organization tethered with the data pieces and then the social intelligence, and teasing out and making the correlations and the connections. And once we all work together, having those domain experts from the insights team, those data experts working together, it was really powerful. And suddenly you were turbocharging, right? There was jet fuel behind the learnings. And I think that was a really exciting time. So again, without providing that actionable framework based on your learnings, you're really doing your organization as well as your insights team somewhat of a disservice, because you can be looked at as, what are you delivering? Are you a cost center? Because we are an expensive piece of the infrastructure at an organization, but not if you're providing that value.
Right. I love that. Liz, again, it starts with that mindset of you have to have action baked into kind of the trajectory of the initiative, again, whatever it is, right? But what I loved in what you just said is how it seems like you can unpack a lot more value, a lot more impact potential if you, for example, in that case, if you get rid of not the silos, but if you kind of connect the dots a lot more, for example, in terms of all the different types of data that flow into an organization, right? So we shouldn't just think about research or data or, again, any kind of insights work as a one-off or one piece, but holistically, the definition and how we look at kind of what we drive in the organization, what value can expand. I think that's a powerful tool for our audience to think about, because usually, researchers, they're very good people. They're very sometimes introverted. They kind of stay in their lane a little bit, depending on the situation, on the organization, seniority of the person. But when you look more broadly, perhaps, as you said, there could be more potential for real business value for the organization.
Bring up so many good points, Susan. The one I want to just tease out a bit is the introverts within the insights profession, and such dedicated individuals, such smart, creative, and yet many are introverts, right? And throughout media, entertainment, other industries as well, it's often that assertive, that louder voice, that extrovert, right, who is garnering all the attention. So I do think that's an area of career development that should not be overlooked, in addition to that continuous growth mindset, that curiosity, the passion, but really pushing oneself outside your comfort zone so that you are seen as a leader, right? And because these individuals are, and they provide such knowledge and such value through the organization, but pushing them outside of their comfort zone. That was something we built into our career development programs within the studio to really encourage that and push that so that people saw the value of networking, of building those connections, of how trust with your business partners means so much, and you build that trust through that engagement and interaction. So I think that, when you said that, that's really a note that I think we can continue to work within our industry on.
Globally speaking, I think across the entire industry. Yes. I love that. Liz, do you feel like professionals in the insights teams, research teams, etc., data science too, this is literally anybody that works with data, do we need a permission to be more kind of extroverted and to get out of our lane? Or do we really tap into that growth mindset, and it's a mindset shift in ourselves? Like, does someone need to say, hey, come sit at this table, ask questions, engage? Or do we need to pave the road for those types of touch points with all the different stakeholders, all the different areas of the big, complex business organization?
I think that you really positioned that well, Susan, in that it is the responsibility of both sides of the table. Mm-hmm. Individuals must push forward and must, right? You and I never were just given a seat at a table, right? I just remember pushing for it, challenging. But I also had advocates within the organization who helped clear that road for me and who helped ensure that I had those opportunities. Well, and I built those relationships, reaching out to individuals, providing value, making them look good, all of the above, so that they could rely on me. And then once that trust, back to that word, they helped me in terms of finding that seat at the table and moving forward. Yeah. And I remember one of the CMOs at the organization who had such an outgoing, extroverted personality shared with me once we became close, Susan, that was a persona. That wasn't her. When she was out in public, she was no longer person A. Yeah. She took on this role or this persona of person B that gave her permission, and she was acting, and that allowed her to project and be the extrovert that she wasn't naturally.
Right.
And that was exhausting. Then she would have to go back and recharge, but she did it to move forward and to ensure that her voice was heard throughout the organization. I always thought that was so smart that, you don't have to be yourself if you, right? Yeah. You can play that role. If that makes it easier, it's sort of back to that fake it till you make it, right? And then suddenly it becomes authentic to who you are, because you always do want to be authentic.
Yeah. That's such a great build on this idea of, again, some of this is our responsibility as professionals whose job it is to inform and push the organization forward. But also a lot of this is what I call people matter. Basically, we can't just be kind of, single lane professionals. I mean, this applies for every discipline, right? Marketing, technology. You really need to master the people aspect of our work. And I think this is not written anywhere necessarily. I don't know if MBA schools necessarily teach this, but to navigate kind of these big complex decisions in order to unlock that value from our work, again, be it tech, be it research, whatever, right? We have to navigate layers of people or, organizational, I don't want to say barriers, but, areas of the organization. And that requires a different skill set, which is most of the time a growth area, but also something that I think, the other stakeholders should demand. Or should expect, maybe should kind of invite professionals, in research to do, and that's hard.
I so agree, Susan. And what you're really saying is we're stronger together,
right?
Regardless of how smart you are, how well informed, how well read, how well prepared, your academic background, having various points of view, understanding, listening.
Right.
And so that should push us outside of our comfort zone, because listening to someone who is outside of your area of expertise, you're going to learn from them, right? You're going to hear something like just through a slightly different lens. And hopefully curiosity will kick in and questions will be asked and a dialogue will develop, and that will help inform work going forward. So not only is networking critical to your career, it's just critical to you as an executive and to you in terms of your output and your understanding overall of the industry in which you're working, and all industry, quite frankly.
Very, very wise advice for any time, but particularly now when in tech, for example, there's so much change, in media as well, right here in Burbank, right? So Liz, I want to kind of continue to make a mental list here. But so far, to have good, impactful leadership as an insights person, you have to obviously know your stuff. That's a given. But you have to have the right mindset, right? You have to be very strategic and start with the assumption that our work has to influence, drive, unlock some kind of decision making, some kind of action. You have to kind of have those relationships, put the networking and time into creating those relationships, which serve as the foundation for trust-based, sharing of insights and together as a team arriving at conclusions, right? Again, this is nothing about, is it a segmentation? Is it a correlation? It has nothing to do with the technical aspects. And it is, I think, hard stuff. What other barriers can you think of, Liz, that you've experienced or you as a leader in your team have removed for people? Barriers to being impactful insights teams, impactful kind of insights leaders, if you will.
I love it, the list we're creating, Susan. It's exciting. I'm jotting down notes. Two other areas really come to mind. because we're aggregating and consolidating such robust data sets, you have to be editors, right, to tell that succinct story, right? Especially working with executives, senior level executives, you have very limited time. So part of your skill set has to be, how am I making this the most impactful body of work possible? And how am I taking 20 pages and editing them down to 5? And how am I editing those 5 slides down to 3 elevator sound bites, so that when I'm with one of these executives, I can nail it. And then they want to see the 5-page deck, or they want to learn more. So really, editor skills, are editing and becoming editors, are critical. And I mean, it should be just continuous. You're continually refining.
Right.
The other thing that I think makes our industry and our field of work so exciting is you're really using both sides of your brain. You have to be analytical. You have to be able to look at data and tease out nuances, but you also have to be creative and problem solve with that data. And again, build a strong narrative, right? A really compelling narrative. So you're working with both sides of your brain, which for me has always been so exciting, right? Because it's not just the data, it's then telling a story with the data and convincing people. Because I believe, Susan, in my heart, that you convince people as much with emotion as you do with sound facts. I mean, you just look at the politics in the United States. Data doesn't matter, right? Facts don't matter. It's an emotionally driven decision. And I'm not in any way advocating that, but I'm saying you have to be able to drive passion and emotion with your arguments as much as having the foundation built by a strong set of data that are pointing in a certain direction. So that takes editing, and that takes writing, and that takes creativity, which is all part of the deliverables. And then working with a very strong graphics or presentation team that can bring it all together in a compelling narrative again. So I think it's such an exciting contrast in skill sets, and it's what keeps us all on our toes.
In addition to all those things, I think that it's a fantastic ad on being a good storyteller, curating, editing the insights, at the right level, at the right time, in front of the right people in the right context, right? Yeah, that's again, a whole different skill set. And you might have, right, Liz, you might have the most compelling data, the best modeling outputs, the best results on some work that you've done. But if you cannot package that effectively, to your point, you're already limited in what impact you can actually have on your internal audience. When I talk about this to others, I don't mean to laugh, but sometimes I get pushback that, hey, as messengers of consumers, on behalf of consumers, as data people, as objective people, etc., it is a kind of like a fine line between being, a good storyteller, adding your own kind of opinion or your own view on kind of what pieces of the story are important to share, as opposed to the truth, the objective, factual truth, right? When we talk about the things you mentioned of like being a good storyteller to be able to influence, how can we balance those two things in a way that would kind of respect the discipline of being objective and looking at data, very evidence-driven, but also being a good strategist that navigates, that leads a team of whatever the audience is to the right, decision, whatever the decision is. How do you balance those two things?
Right. It's, again, great perspective, Susan, in that I truly believe, again, that people make decisions based on their own lens, their own biases, and emotions. So when I say you have to be a good storyteller and build a strong narrative, it has to be based on data. It has to be based on foundational knowledge, right? You're not spinning a story. But what you are doing is putting context around it to ensure your audience hears it, because your audience is human. And if you go in with just a drawing numbers and you know, again, you're not going to move hearts and minds. So I do believe there is always that balance. But you mentioned something else, knowing your audience. Different audiences, you're going to craft that narrative based on how you know them. Again, back to why relationships are so important, right? I mean, I've had individuals that I worked with and for that were lawyers by training who challenged everything. It took me so long to understand, well, that was their training.
Yep.
And once I could jump into that game and into that narrative, we had great relationships. But before I started putting on like, wow, why is that constant challenge? And I was like, well, that's their training.
Yep.
So really understanding everyone that you work with, who are they? Where are they coming from? What is their background? What is driving them? And that comes from getting to know people. Relationships matter. You craft your story, you craft your narrative to meet them where they are. And then you're going to get the buy-in that you need, right? So it's all about language. It's all about connection and communication. And I don't see as much of that pushback. I guess because the majority of my career to date has been in media, and you're working with creatives, telling them a data-filled story, though, in a narrative and in a story was the only way to really communicate with them, right? Because these are creatives who, like, again, their language is creativity. If you come in with data and just data, you're not going to move anyone.
Yeah.
So, some of that was that training. And again, understanding your audience.
Excellent. So much valuable kind of insight there, Liz. And I'm trying to figure out which of the things you mentioned is a good, which one I should ask a couple more questions on, Liz, if that's okay. So the idea of knowing your audience and speaking their language is critical, very well understood. And the notion of like you have to balance, data, evidence, etc., with kind of storytelling. In one particular situation where roadblocks to value and impact and action often happen is when your audience is not willing or is not, is not open to kind of the message or the truth from the work that your team may have done, right? It's not something that they expected, or it's not something that they agree with, or it's, they don't believe it, right? There could be lots of different flavors of that. We always think about creative folks, but finance is also, I think, in that bucket. Their language, their worldview is very unique. It's okay to have questions, but sometimes you really know in your heart of hearts that no matter what you show someone, an executive or a team, they're just not going to buy it. They're not going to believe it. And that's a challenging kind of situation if you're really impact-driven and if you want to, again, unlock lots of action and value with the work. How would you recommend, again, based on years of wisdom and hands-on experience and very complex decisions, how would you recommend our audience navigate that situation?
This is a very common situation, what you're explaining, Susan, in a real life situation. So I appreciate this question. A couple examples which may help frame my response. So one of the heads of creative, I'll work with creative and then finance. One of the heads of creative I worked with for many years didn't trust focus groups at all. It was one of, that's all John. People can't tell you what they like, what they don't like. I mean, we've all heard that, right?
Yeah.
So I knew I wasn't going to change this individual's mind on qual for series testing, right? That was not going to work. But what we started using qual for was some of the whys, and really what we had success with was building personas around different platforms, bringing things to life. Because he was a creative, he didn't want creative input on his series, but he was a creative. When he saw personas around his competitive landscape as opposed to just data, right? This is the person watching like percent comp and psychographic, but he saw a visualization of and then the differences. Loved it. And then we started running personas and building these representations in really cool presentation, really cool art. And that sparked with him. And from that introduction, then little by little, we teased out, right, other learnings. And little by little, we were able then to start to test series and provide guideposts for series and not necessarily, creative notes. He was never moved to that point, but we really did bring him aboard. So that was something where using our tool set, we were able to move him forward. And now I'll share something more in working with finance teams and how insights and data organizations really are plugged in. Oftentimes when launching a new business or an extension of a business, the insights organization and finance work together, right? Are closely aligned. The insights organization is often tasked with market sizing, consumer sizing, uptake, churn estimates, whatever that may be, Susan, as you know. And those numbers then are critical to be plugged into those financial models, right? So that really, again, necessitates this trust and this bond between the insights organization and the financial teams to ensure that the finance team is fully on board, fully briefed, has complete buy-in on where the market size, consumer base, whatever it is, how it originated, the tension, like back and forth tension and conversation was like robustly tested, and everyone's on board. Because when you're going to market with a new product, you want to ensure that, it has been pressure tested within your organization, that you have put real rigor behind it, and that the teams are aligned on those data sets that you're going forward with, both on the methodology, where your estimates landed. So I think that's critical. And what we're actually teasing out, Susan, and this is another great learning, I think, for insights and analytics, is that you get to work with every single team or within a business, right? So from marketing to PR to finance to senior executives to creative to whomever. And insights is really unique in that way. And because of that, you do have to your question, be able to speak in the language of a finance team, of a creative team, of a marketing team. I remember, again, that key marketer said to me, don't speak in research to me, like talk to me, right? Because she couldn't understand at a certain level, but she could, and wicked smart, but that wasn't her language. So, but how exciting is that you get to work with all of these individuals, all of these disciplines, have influence across an entire organization. But that necessitates having that knowledge of their language, that knowledge of who they are, and how you can most effectively partner with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love both of those examples. They're so real. They're real world examples. They hit on the right notes in terms of kind of the way challenges surface in those types of situations between those teams. And I'm sure there's countless more examples we can bring. Liz, the next question I wanted to ask is a question that I think, can be asked lots of different ways, but it's about where we should, as a team leader or as like a marketing stakeholder or a different, tech stakeholder, whatever the case is, when you're interacting with research, right, or data, what is the right ratio? It feels to me that most of the effort still in our industry, broadly speaking, goes into kind of executing the research, planning, like really getting the technical aspects right, which is, to me, that's like, ticket to entry. Like you have to have that, right? As opposed to, maybe 70, 80% of our time, energy, money, effort goes into that. And then perhaps the last 20, 30% goes into, okay, so now what are we going to do with this? How are we going to socialize this? How are we going to move the organization forward? I may be a little extreme in my balance there, but what is your observation, again, broadly speaking, and what do you ideally want that ratio to be for the industry to aspire to? Kind of where do you put most of your energy? And part of this, Liz, like with all the technology advancements, et cetera, how can we use that to achieve that, kind of that smarter balance of, what you're going to do, how you're going to influence with this work, as opposed to the work of getting to the results.
So this is sort of bifurcated for me, Susan. As I continued my career path, and I'm sure this is similar for you, perhaps, that ratio really shifted, right, in terms of the level. In my most recent role, it was 80-20, 80% strategist, 20% execution, right? I had to have my hands in the data enough to ensure that I could speak knowledgeably and really understand the nuances. That was actually probably done more on my time because my role was more of strategist and of sharing the implications, the ramifications of those learnings, right? It wasn't of me getting my hands in on the data, but that changed and shifted as you grew. And I remember I got this great piece of advice early on in my career that with every step and every time you were promoted, you should drop 80% of your old responsibilities because you should be grabbing new responsibilities and learning, right? And if you're holding on to what you were doing and just adding, you're not going to be successful. You have to, and that's, a lot of people aren't confident enough to say, okay, I'm dropping that and I'm going to learn, and I might have to even define my new role in some cases, but I'm going to do it. And that's going to give me that opportunity to grow and evolve into that new role and then continue that. So that 80-20, like dropping 80%, only maintaining 20, so you have a clean plate. And then that allows you to that shift where you become more of that strategist, that consultative partner. And hopefully teams are 50-50, right? Like, so there's so many people that are, yes, just working on the foundational work, but they're starting to shift towards sharing that out and sharing the ramifications and the implications. So a team, a good goal would be 50-50, but a leader, 80-20, and then so on down.
Right. I love that, Liz. I'm going to steal that 80%, drop your old responsibilities to grow, to have room for growth. I think the shift or the evolution as a team grows and matures, etc., is spot on. I've never heard anyone articulate it as well as you did there, Liz. Thank you. Do you think there should be an underlying expectation? Because I feel like a lot of teams, in complex organizations, they excel at the foundational work and they hang on to that because there is no expectation, because the leadership around them or other stakeholders around them are not expecting or not allowing them to, most likely expecting them to kind of grow into that, consultative or strategic kind of role. I think maybe this goes back to the first point that we had, that, is it a push or a pull? It's probably both ways, but I want us to raise that awareness that you should think about what comes after the execution from the very beginning, proactively.
So agree with you, Susan. And I remember actually working on a project with you years ago where we outlined our hypothesis before we even started. And what do we hope to learn? What do we hope this will influence or inform? And then we use that as an outline. And some of the data, confirmed, and then some led us to new paths, new pathways of understanding. So I think that is so critical that if you don't go in with that mindset and that framework, then you are really relegated to that reporter of data. And that minimizes the value of a team, the value and perception of the team, what you bring. It's all tethered together, right? Because back to introvert, extrovert, like people are so comfortable working on the data or working on the argument or working on the problem in their office or at their home or whatever, but as opposed to having a debate and a good rigorous discussion with a stakeholder and really pushing back. Again, some of that comes from the leadership on your team, ensuring that everyone is supported and that voice is critical. One other thing we didn't talk on, but I'd touch on it, but I'd like to mention is even though we had a hierarchy within the organization, we were run very flat. Everyone's idea was as valuable as everyone else's. Anyone on my team could question me, could push back. They could have a better idea than me 9 9 days out of 10, right? I didn't believe I knew all and what I think is also exciting at this time, we have 4 generations in the workforce, right? From boomers to Xers to millennials to Y. We should be learning from each other. We all have different perspectives. We all have different takes. And to assume that boomers, because they're the senior leadership still, know all is folly, right? Yeah. Because you just see these new industries and these new competitors coming in and usurping legacy businesses because they're not tethered to legacy thinking, and they're pivoting and they're meeting the consumers where their needs are and beyond. It's so exciting. But you have to have an organization where that senior leadership team is confident enough to say, hey, I can learn from that 20-something, intern or analyst, or because they're coming with a fresh perspective. I think that is what makes a team strong as well.
So powerful, Liz. And I think you took the conversation from impact from within the organization to kind of broader in terms of the market and, kind of mega shifts within specific industries of, these new business models coming up, being born in, specific kind of not within those generations, but, younger leaders, more millennial, Gen Z, perhaps, business model innovators, right? Who are shifting the entire landscape. And if we're talking impact, like we need to be able to at least have the curiosity, the openness within a team, personally within a team, but culturally within companies to engage, pollinate, cross-pollinate, learn from each other, so that greater impact can be achieved. And by the way, all of this is about making sure that the customer or the consumer or the target market wins as well, right, Liz? Like, to me, let's not forget that, right? A lot of this is, we do all this work, we ask good questions, we observe good behavioral data, whatever it is, right? The whole point is to do the best products, services, etc., campaigns, whatever the case is, for the consumer, for the target market. And if we just focus on one aspect of that entire equation, and not think about the people, the organizational, broader cultural, we're not doing them any service. I think that's super important not to forget.
Insights without action, Susan, are pointless. And that action is business action, right? Whichever industry you're in. Mm-hmm. So insights without action are pointless. I so agree with you. And it's having that business lens, that business filter, critical. And having diverse, multi-generational voices and input create a product, service, or opportunity that is tailored for the consumers we're serving today, because that is our consumer base.
Yep. Awesome. Liz, I know that we can talk on and on about this because you're giving me such a wealth of kind of knowledge, but also like new angles, new ways to think about things that I thought I had already exhausted. Apparently not. So thank you for your time and for all this wisdom that you've shared with us. I wanted to, I usually wrap up with 3 questions, if that's okay. The first question is, we talk so much about impact and making a difference with our work, but when it comes to, in your own personal realm, like a small thing that you do as part of your daily life to have impact in the world, positive impact in the world, can you share something with our audience that would tell us how you do impact personally in the world?
I think what I'm most proud of, Susan, is throughout the industry and in my personal life, but throughout the industry, always being open and collaborative to all, and really ensuring that I've thought of myself as like, if you think of a wolf pack, like the leader is at the very back of the pack, right? And lets the scouts and the young wolves move forward. And you're making sure that there's no one falls behind and everyone is moving forward and everyone has opportunity. And that is how I perceive leadership and how I would evaluate, am I being successful? Am I providing guidance, platform, advocacy? And I want to continue to do that throughout my career. And I think that goes a long way. And again, you deliver for your consumer and your business, but you're also helping cultivate individuals, both personally and professionally.
I love that because it's such a horizontal. It applies to work, but also in life, right? Kind of leading from behind and allowing platform for others to grow and have access, etc. Thank you for that, Liz. And if there was one thing that you would encourage our audience members to do for positive impact, in order to have positive impact in their own lives or work, what would that one thing be?
Really stretch outside your comfort zone, both personally and professionally. So what I mean by that in terms of professionally is identify a couple key individuals within your organization or the industry and reach out and say, I'm going to make a connection and I'm going to try and build a foundation. Years ago, I reached out to an individual at our organization that like we were worlds apart. And I was like, I'm going to kill her with kindness and Project Charm. And we became lifelong friends, right? I was always authentic and myself. And it wasn't, I wanted something from her. I just wanted to get to know her and have her get to know me. And it took time. But I was always my authentic self. And she sparked to that. And we became lifelong friends. So it was and again, back to those introverts within our industry, that's a difficult challenge, but it's something, especially you mentioned this early on, Susan, so much change within media, within tech, downsizing, having those connections is critical and they don't happen overnight. So, in these roles, make these contacts and reach out and build your it's not just even your network, but it's really just connections, human connections.
Super powerful, super important, and often forgotten or neglected by most professionals who are married to their jobs, who their heart and soul, right, is poured in every day into the role, into the job.
But look at us, Susan. Like we haven't spoken in a few years, and we caught right back up because there was a respect, a warmth. A collaboration. I loved working with you. I remember it fondly. And it was like, that's in my memory bank, right? And I think those are, when you make those real connections with people, and then you reached out to me and it was wonderful to hear from you.
Very nice. The sentiment is absolutely the same for me, Liz. And I want to share that with our audience. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you, Liz, inspired by this conversation, this rich wisdom that you've imparted, what's the best way to get in touch with you? How can they find you easily if someone wanted?
I'm easily found on LinkedIn, right? And also Liz Huszarik at outlook.com. But start on LinkedIn, and I love meeting new people and making connections and learning from people. So very much looking forward to making new connections.
I really, really appreciate your openness, Liz. I think everything that you've shared actually supports that authentically. Thank you for your insights here, for sharing, for your generous knowledge. Really, really enjoyed this conversation. Hopefully we'll have another chance down the road in the future to talk about a different part of the research and insights and data world. But thank you so much for coming and for being my guest. I thoroughly enjoyed it. As you heard in this episode of All About Impact, it takes a strategic mindset of growth to start achieving impact with research. Data without insights is meaningless. Insights without action is pointless. What is your mindset for driving impact within your organization? Impact is the next dimension of research and could be a lot easier with the right partner. Reach out to me, Susan Petoyan, on LinkedIn, and let's together discover the impact champion in you. Tune in next week for another episode of All About Impact.